Hello and welcome to the show. For the next half an hour, we will discuss the most important economic stories of the week. We try and help you understand economic policies a little better, as well as apprising you of the important economic stories of the week. Whether you're an investor, a consumer, an entrepreneur, or just someone who wants to understand economic policy a little better, this is the show to watch. You're watching Policy Watch, and I'm Athar Khan. Our top story this week is the landmark 2G spectrum verdict by the Supreme Court. In a blow to the telecom sector as a whole, 121 licenses were scrapped by the apex court on the grounds that they were given on unconstitutional and arbitrary grounds. We'll also discuss India's decision to continue oil imports from Iran despite fresh EU sanctions against that country. Sanctions come after the US has already threatened to blacklist any financial firm doing business with Iran's central bank. Later in the show, we'll talk about the government's plan to garner higher dividends from PSUs to raise some much-needed funds. And to help us understand these stories, we have a special guest in the studio today, Shubhamoy Bhattacharya, Shubhamoy Bhattacharji, if I'm getting your name right, Executive Editor of the Financial Express. Welcome to the show and thank you for joining us. We'll go straight into our top story, which will be the 2G verdict. Now, the apex court on Thursday revoked 121 telecom licenses issued in 2008 in a judgment which, although hailed by civil society, could further darken the business climate in Asia's third largest economy. Licenses held by 5 companies, including the local joint ventures of Norway's Telenor and Abu Dhabi's Etisalat, were cancelled in the verdict. The apex court ruled that the current licenses would remain valid for another 4 months, during which time the government should decide fresh norms for issuing telecom licenses. Stocks of telecom companies, including Reliance Communications and Unitech, tanked after the verdict. 3 licenses of Tata, 21 of Videocon, 22 of Uninor, 9 of Idea, 6 of Estel, 13 of Swan Telecom, 15 of Etisalat DB, 21 of Loop Telecom, and 21 of Sistema Sham were scrapped. Now, Shubhamoy, this judgment, this verdict obviously came just yesterday, shook the whole establishment. First thoughts on the judgment, your first thoughts?
It's the biggest ever in the issue of economic policy in India. And we haven't really had any judgment from the Supreme Court, any other court. And I'm aware of the Vodafone 11,000 crore tax case. But even that is not as significant as this one in terms of the impact, the amount, and the overall repercussions that they're going to have.
Right. Also, I was reading some edit pages yesterday. There have been some legal experts who've come forward and said that they don't really consider this as a landmark judgment. It's not a very informed judgment. Why? Because they say that all the facts were not listened to. Everything wasn't really taken. If I could just quote them right now, they say that all the facts haven't been examined in their entirety. Do you agree with that at all?
No, definitely not. All the facts were all there. In fact, the Supreme Court didn't have to try too hard. And the reason for that is the entire case rested on a 2008 March press note issued by Telecom Minister A. Raja at the time, where he set a cutoff date, back date, where 575 licenses, applications which had come, he said they are there and that's it. And on the basis of that, we'll give the licenses. That press release was scratched by the Delhi High Court. Estel, which went to the courts, withdrew the case. So Delhi High Court allowed it to withdraw, but it said the principle that the press release was bad in law stood. So Supreme Court essentially wasn't breaking, or rather hadn't to really change anything. The established yardsticks were already there, right, and it simply said taking it forward from there.
So basically, critics of the judgment obviously have no case to stand on. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Also, stocks of these companies, Unitech tanked yesterday, as well as Reliance Communications. What do you think the extent of the loss of these companies would be in the coming months?
Yeah, I mean, what will happen now is that the impact of this judgment will be felt over quite some time. I mean, we've just had the judgment. Now there'll be the impact on the companies, there'll be the impact on the government, and there'll be the impact on the consumers. The consumers is not too much, it's about 7 million people, so that's something which can be handled. But the basic thing is about what happens to the companies which had invested, what happens to their balance sheet, what happens to their position. So you can be sure that there'll be lots of arbitration notices which will come in, right, especially those which are from the foreign company tie holders. Right. You know, they have an issue in terms of shareholder probity and stuff and all the thing. Telenor, for instance, would be going in to say, like, you come along. I mean, I didn't do anything wrong. Technically speaking, that's a dubious ground.
Right.
But the point is that they will be challenging this judgment. So there'll be lots of these issues that will come up.
Right.
For the government also will be the case.
It's interesting that you mentioned Telenor. Yesterday, a Telenor spokesperson said that the tonality of the judgment is such that it turns out that the policy was faulty. So why punish us? Do you think that's fair?
Well, fair enough. I mean, if the policy was wrong and you went into a policy, there's nothing in the common law of a country which says that you can technically bribe. Can you? You cannot. So just taking that similar
It's
example.
illegal. Bribing is illegal, obviously.
Exactly. So if a policy, I mean, to say that the policy was wrong, what the Supreme Court is saying is much more. It's saying it is a giving away of natural resources as a graft.
Right.
It is coming down with absolutely harsh words on that.
Right.
And then to say, for a company to say, whichever company, that, the policy, I mean, we didn't set the policy. Sure, you weren't supposed to set the policy. But a policy which was so wrong, getting into it would obviously bring the impact of the, swinging along with the policy. I mean, let's put it this way. Blood Diamond in Namibia is scarred. De Beers moved out of that because they realized that's bad. Now, the policy wasn't being set by De Beers, it was being set by the Namibian government. But does it stop them from being tarred? Because of the impact of that, they decided that we will not have anything to do with it, and other companies also. So, I mean, that's the international system.
Right. Also, let's talk about TRAI for a little bit, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India for a bit. The Supreme Court, in its verdict, has also said that TRAI has about 4 months to give new recommendations, so they have to go about their job now. Where do you think, what do you make of that piece? What should TRAI do now? What would their next logical step be?
Well, first of all, Athar, you raised a very valid point. TRAI. Other than DOT, everybody had been looking at culpability and culpability of the DOT minister and his officials. But an equally bad role in terms of compromising the recommendations or other was sent in by TRAI. And that is where the problem is. TRAI never said it clearly. In fact, this morning too, I heard Nupendra Mishra, the former chairman of TRAI, saying that it's DOT which takes the final call. Well, that's not really TRAI's lookout. TRAI has to say and step out and say whether this is acceptable or not. And on successive stages, not just in the allocation of this spectrum, but also in where the existing operators like Vodafone, Bharti and others were asking that our subscriber should be linked to the amount of spectrum that we had.
Right.
TRAI was also asked to give its recommendation. TRAI didn't give give an equivocal recommendation. Now, that was the basis on which Raja found that, so therefore the demand is not there because he had got the recommendation. So therefore, he said this spectrum is now available to be auctioned.
Right. So the auctioning route, you think, obviously, is the best way to go. First come, first serve blew up in everyone's faces, obviously.
Yeah.
So you think auctioning is the way to go?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first come, first serve means what? I mean, first come, first serve can also work. There can be lots of ways where first come, first served works brilliantly. I mean, Government of India keeps on selling bonds every time. It's on the first come, first served basis. There are lots of others where the first come, first served basis is used. But it has to be transparent, clear rules.
Right.
You can't change the rules. No one is doubting. Kapil Sibal is actually going way beyond his brief to say that we were following the first come, first served thing. The first come, first served principle itself was compromised by the minister and no one took notice.
Right. The telecom ministry seems to be turning into a hotbed for corruption ever since the first scam ever broke out. That's probably, it's something I've noticed and some other people have noticed. But moving on, the biggest question now, obviously, on some people's minds, some people say the biggest question about the consumers now. What happens to the consumers? Do you think they'll lose much because mobile portability is in full force?
Absolutely.
Do you think they'll lose out much?
Yeah, so sure, they have numbers. There is one problem though. Many of these companies, or rather broadly, Etisalat and Uninor, especially Uninor, had opened up its base in states like Bihar and UP. Now, those are the areas where the reach of the others were lower. So these guys were turned. So there could be an issue from those areas. But then that is something that the government is not saying that your bill is fraud or that you cannot shift to another thing. So the government can always give a migrational system and make the switch easy for these people.
Right. Let's say Uninor, for example, has about 36 million subscribers in India. And that's also just a bit player in a market dominated by, say, Bharti and Vodafone. How is that going to affect all these companies
Absolutely.
now? Is Bharti going to gain from all of this? Is Vodafone going to gain from all of this?
obviously these subscribers will come along to the major incumbents. And to that extent that the market gets consolidated, we will have prices changing, we'll have much more certainty. But then that's it. I mean, you can't have 122 licenses, everybody, and without any ability, any demonstrated ability to come into the sector, walking in with a check to say that, hey, presto, I mean, I've got a license and give me one.
But do you think this judgment that it has come at a very, very important point in this juncture? Obviously, some other cases related to this case have gone to the trial court and et cetera, et cetera. But do you think this will get a semblance of transparency into the system, into policy initiatives that the government takes from now on?
Right. In fact, you would have noticed that over the last few months, the momentum in the 2G case was sort of dwindling. Some of the guys had come out in jail, and the others against whom the prosecution was going was slightly tapering off. This one puts the steam back on it, makes it clear that where the problem is. The government has been trying to say, obfuscate by setting up the Shivraj Patel committee and others that these are basically some things which is historical, given we didn't start it. Basically trying to ensure that it was becoming a policy issue. It wasn't something which was clearly addressable. The Supreme Court has gone for the jugular, said very clearly that here is a transparently false, illegal allocation of natural resources. So we cancel it.
And a very valuable resource at that. The army has been using it. It's a very valuable national resource, if I might say so.
I mean, even any river or any piece of land, commons. I mean, it belongs to the government, and if it's giving out, sure it should give out, but there should be rules.
Right. Before we move on to a break, I would like to ask you a brief question. Obviously, what are the implications for the government now? The government looks bad, doesn't it?
Yes, but at the same time, there is an advantage. Once the licenses have been cancelled, this spectrum that will be there for sure will have to be auctioned. The problem is, of course, the companies don't have the money. So depending on when it is able to auction it, that will have to be talked to the companies and all that.
Right.
But whenever it auctions it, it will get a very decent amount of money. So Pranab Mukherjee actually next fiscal might be a very happy man.
Right.
Even if he garners 20 to 25,000, 30,000 rupees, or even slightly more from this thing, then it is a fantastic money to keep the fiscal numbers very happy.
Fair point. We'll talk about that a little more. But we'll also have to go into break right now. Don't go anywhere. We have lots more stories coming up after the break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Policy Watch. Now, despite fresh sanctions on Iran, India this week rebuffed the US and the EU by maintaining that we will not cut down on oil imports from Iran. Even as the move is being seen as a political victory for Tehran, the question on everyone's mind is now, how will Indian oil companies pay out Iranian oil without running afoul of these sanctions? The Policy Watch team filed this report. Take a look.
Iran is increasingly alienating itself from the Western world, especially the US, in light of its continued nuclear program. Despite several attempts by the US to persuade Iran to give up their nuke program, Tehran has shown no signs of relenting. The EU imposed an oil embargo last week and froze the assets of Iran's central bank as well. The United States has already decided to blacklist any financial firms on its soil that dares to do business with Iran's central bank. Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee clarified India's stand on the issue on Sunday, stating that India's emerging economy demands an energy requirement that Iran would help fulfill. India joins China as the second big economic player to continue its relation with Tehran. More recently, Cambodia has joined in the chorus as well, with its government announcing that it plans to import refined oil from Iran. India and China together accounted for 34% of Iran's oil exports from January to September 2011, slightly more than Europe. Oil imports from Iran account for 9% of India's consumption, 6% of China's consumption. Iran exports 2.5 million barrels a day, of which Europe gets 500,000 barrels. Rest goes to China, India, Japan and Korea. Indian companies now route their payments through a Turkish bank after the EU forced German-based Handelsbank AG to stop transaction last year. Analysts, however, believe that India's stand could be a way to buy time to diversify oil supply, especially if the world's largest producer, Saudi Arabia, decides to offer a more attractive alternative. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Do you think that's the right decision for India? India imports about 12%, if I'm not wrong, of its oil from Iran. Not backing down from getting oil from Tehran right now, would that be is that a very good policy decision at all?
Well, Athar, basically, you'll have to see that India, for India, it's also a geopolitical consideration. Technically speaking, we do suffer nothing if we shift to Saudi Arabia. The heavy crude, which we are essentially using, Saudi Arabia also has lots of it. In fact, it has more, and it is willing to supply at the same price. So the international oil balance doesn't get disturbed, the international oil market balance. So we don't have a problem there. The problem that India envisages is that if India moves out of Iran, brings down the amount of exposure to Iranian oil, Iran and USA have a standoff in which oil would be a major significant thing, and then there would be gas after a few years. If India today commits itself to say that I'm moving out of Iran, then Tehran, subsequently once this thing is over, that's what India is reading, then Tehran will say, come along, you are not there in our gas power plant. So essentially, India thinks that the US sanction against Iran is something on which, okay, fine, we swing along, but don't sort of put all the basket in the Saudi Arabian barrels.
All the eggs in the Saudi Arabian basket.
And therefore, get locked into a situation where you're out of the Iranian gas.
Right. So basically, the game is being played with an eye on the future. Oil is just not about oil; it's also about natural gas, which might be very important in the days to come,
Right.
in the years to come. Obviously, fair point. Now, there is also another theory that's going around. Despite India's assertion that we're not going to move out of Tehran and we're not going to, completely cut off ties with Tehran, we will get oil from them. There is a report, a congressional report, in fact, in the US, which says quite the opposite, saying that India could move closer towards the EU and the US position on this by mid 2012. Do you see that happening at all?
Well, to a certain extent, it's a question of what position you give out. Like China and Korea import a large amount of oil from Iran. But what they do is they have a large amount of bilateral trade with this country. So they pay for it in that way. For India, what position it takes vis-a-vis EU and USA will depend on the amount of bilateral trade. Frankly, among the 4 countries which your Bureau report said, US, China, Korea, and India, to which China...
And Cambodia has just been added to that.
Cambodia is very small. I mean, to which Iran exports. India has the lowest amount of bilateral trade, non-oil trade with Iran. So India's, what you might call the ability to negotiate in terms of, offering something else to Iran is difficult. And that is why India is trying to, please both.
What about the important question of paying Iran back? Obviously, the rupee is not fully convertible there. Tehran has suggested that we should pay them in Japanese yen. What is the best way forward there, do you think?
See, the US government will keep on shifting the goalpost. They will keep on putting in new sanctions till this matter is resolved. One way or the other, they sort of get it out with Iran. So there is no way that whatever India might decide to do with Iran will serve as something as a blueprint for the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It will not. We'll have to revisit this question again and again. How do we pay the money? Yes, we don't have a convertible rupee, so therefore the options are we take ask them to do bilateral trade with us, which is actually not something that Iran has been heavily doing. So that's where we have a trouble. Paying in Japanese
Maybe step up the range of exports that will be sent to them.
well, exactly, but Iran doesn't seem to want. Iran is quite comfortable that it sends oil and it has a nice trade surplus with India. And that's where we stand.
Right.
And even if we try to give Japanese yen, we don't have that amount of balance left because we are also paying for the huge infrastructure development through the Japanese currency.
Right. There's also plan B that India is mooting, the UCO Bank way as it's known. Right now, I think 5 Iranian banks that are not in the circle of those sanctions. I think, if I'm not getting their names wrong, Bank Pazian, Pasargad, Saman, Sarmai, and Karfarin Bank. These 5 obviously are not within that circle of those sanctions. Plus, plan B is UCO Bank. What do you think? Is that a very good plan?
You know, Athar, how it happens? Basically, the point is, since the Asian Currency Union doesn't operate with Japan, with Iran. So what we do is, we pay, the Indian oil companies cannot open an account with Indian banks and ask it for the dollar to be converted and to be given to Iran. So Iranian banks, we are encouraging them that, okay, fine, come along, open a account in India. And typically, we are targeting here. Now, this is where the problem will come. We are targeting a bank, Indian bank, which does not have foreign exposure. So in future, if US or EU decide to issue some sanctions against these banks, UCO Bank will not be affected because UCO Bank doesn't have too much of foreign exposure.
Right.
But this is a very dicey thing to do.
Right,
They say this is something on which we can't be sure that this is, because once you've tarred UCO Bank with this payment conduit mechanism, there will be some sanctions at some stage or other for which UCO Bank will have to pay.
Shoma, very quickly, if I could just interrupt you, one more question on this story. How far can India really walk this tightrope, considering that US is an ally of ours and we would like to have it?
Yeah, we'll have to keep on doing it. I mean, there's no way that we can really think that we'll get out of this entire thing, we'll buy from Saudi Arabia. We could buy, but then, there's also the geopolitical issue. But Saudi Arabia has been supporting Pakistan. Of course, now, of late, you'd notice that Saudi Arabia has stopped giving credit for oil to Pakistan, saying that we'll treat all our importers equally. So there are those issues. So it's something which we'll have to keep on visiting for the time.
We'll take another break, we'll come back. Don't go anywhere, there's one more story that we have to discuss with Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still with Policy Watch. Now, the government is looking to garner higher dividends from public sector enterprises this fiscal. Eyeing an additional 7,000 crore rupees, senior finance ministry officials have been meeting the heads of cashless PSUs to take the total collection of tax in this fiscal to over 30,000 crore rupees. In addition, the government is looking to get another 1,500 crore through the dividend distribution tax, or DDT. During 2010-11, the government collected 25,978 crores as dividend from the public sector enterprises. The target for the current fiscal was pegged at 23,495 crores. The government has been facing financial problems on account of its rising subsidy bill and the poor receipt from disinvestment. And the fiscal deficit for 2011-2012 is expected to exceed the budget target of 4.6% of the GDP. Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee has informed Parliament already that the subsidy bill for FY12 is likely to exceed the budget estimate of rupees 1 lakh crore. Now, Shubhamoy, the DEA secretary in the Finance Ministry has been meeting heads of cashless PSUs to try and convince them to give them higher dividends this year. Thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. They've been asking them, and in fact, quite a few of them have paid up. ONGC has paid something like 3,500 crore. and others would also be paying, coughing up a huge amount. They pay dividends two-way. The one they pay as natural course of the profit, and they pay what is called a special dividend. So yes, they've been milking them.
But do you think there's the right way to go? Because obviously the fiscal situation is in a mess right now, the huge yawning deficit right now. But do you think raising quick capital or quick cash from the PSUs every time we have a deficit problem is the right way to go?
This is another policy issue that we need to solve out. That what exactly do we want our PSUs to do? Sure, PSUs have the money, but they don't have that money as something which is kept in a treasure trove. They have that money as an investor's fund to be used for investment. Now, if they're not investing, or if sometimes the investment has taken time, that's because of issues which the government has to solve out. But to say that, look, my fiscal deficit is running bad, so I therefore pick it up, is something like which is the worst possible idea of fiscal management.
Right. Also, there's another option on the table for the government, which is the buyback option, the share buyback option. But some PSUs, some especially cash-rich PSUs, might have a problem with that because they might need the money for themselves.
Exactly.
Don't you think the PSUs could have a problem there?
Quite true. In fact, SEBI early January allowed the new route, institutional placement route, for
the IPP.
For banks to, for companies to come in directly and raise money, raise equity, additional equity by or sell equity by going to institutions. But again, this is something which is another way of short charging the markets, and the markets essentially don't look at it nicely. ONGC paid heavily in terms of ratings for a couple of years when Morgan Stanley downgraded it, and that affected its borrowing cost. So everything is, there's no free lunch. There has to be a cost of all these things.
Right. Also, one more option on the table, and I think which is inter-PSU investment, asking one PSU to invest in other PSUs. Don't you think that's also a slightly dicey option, and PSUs might have a problem with it?
Absolutely. I mean, you ask a PSU, supposing Coal India is investing in, say, a company like, say, Instruments India, or you're asking a company like ONGC to invest in, say, IRFC. I mean, what is the synergy, and why should they do it? If they have to do it, they should do it through the boards, they should do it through reasons of investment. This is where we are talking of Navratna, Maharatna, autonomy for the PSUs, and this is what we are asking the PSUs to do. So obviously, it just shows up where the government is exactly leading it to.
Right, fair point at all. Now, what we can take away from today's program with Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee is obviously the verdict in the 2G spectrum case was a landmark verdict. It will affect the policy initiatives by the government as well. Will also bring some semblance of transparency into the policy initiatives that the government takes. Also, the government needs to decide what PSUs are actually for. Are they just cash cows, or do they have a long-term plan? Thank you so much, Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, for joining us. Till next week, when we have another special guest on Policy Watch, this is Athar Khan saying goodbye.